Welcome to Books Are Good Medicine, a podcast sponsored by the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, featuring books and other Native American-focused teaching resources. We are your hosts, Allison Waka
and Odia Woodkrieger. Today we have an Authors Talk episode with the brilliant James Vukelich Kaagegaabaw. James is a speaker, digital creator, and author. His work focuses on preserving and celebrating Ojibwe language and culture, and how Indigenous wisdom can lead us all to a good life. Mino-bimaadiziwin.
James has a new book coming out this fall, a children's book called Wisdom Weavers, that introduces children to the Ojibwe language. It also includes a brief history of the Ojibwe people and a culturally accurate guide to creating a dream catcher at home.
We have a great conversation with James about his work and new book. We hope that you enjoy the episode. Well, good morning.
Good morning. Bonjour.
Bonjour. We are so excited to have you on the show. And listeners probably don't know this, but I've known you, it seems like forever. We used to work together at Minneapolis Public Schools.
I didn't know that.
We did.
We did
indeed. For many years, many winters.
We were part of the dream team. You know, it was the time in Minneapolis Public Schools where, you know, we had Ida Downwind and Deanna Standing Cloud, Danielle Grant, who's now at Achieve Twin Cities, is
the
there.
Original.
Yeah, and we used to be able to do so many cool things. And I think a lot of the work that we were able to do, just language and Star Lab and all of these things, professional development, presentations at the National Indian Education Association, we were doing all of these things.
It's a really exciting time. Really a lot of very cool, intelligent Anishinaabe. It was, I look back at it with fond memories.
Yeah. But I'm going to jump right into sort of a hard time because they're always, I think when I was reading this book, you started off really talking about, it was a hard time for you. Even though it was a beautiful time, it was hard. And I remember you were doing language table over and over. And one time you said to me, Tia, I feel like a Vegas act and I'm just doing greatest hits over and over again. And I was like, yeah, I guess it must feel like that. Like Indians 101 or Ojibwe or Anishinaabe 101 over and over again. And this book, you get super vulnerable. And you started off like, this is me.
The book is 7 generations and there's 7 grandfather teachings. Mm-hmm. Just to interject there a little bit.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I remember when you first gave your talk, and it was at Anishinaabe Academy. And the first time I heard it, not the first time you gave it, but the first time I heard it, and I thought the top of my head blew off. Oh. Like it was the craziest thing. I was like, I didn't even feel like my skin was on me anymore. And it was like, I'd waited to hear this for so long. And I just didn't know I needed to hear it. And I'm curious, how are people responding to all of your talks around Turtle Island?
I remember that talk. Very fondly. I'm glad you mentioned that because when I talk about fond memories, the people I worked with and I got to see on a daily basis, particularly my namesake, Mushkine Bikwe, Ida Downwind, who is really amazing. You, of course, Geta Bikwe, Deanna Standing Cloud, Danielle. That was a really exciting time in my life, but it was incredibly challenging as well. I was chronically underemployed as an Ojibwe teacher. I had, at this point in my life, impoverished myself and my family trying to continue. And I had reached this point where I was like, I'd gone through a radical spiritual transformation. And I was actually ready to let go of teaching the language. It was like I could have the language in my life on a daily basis. I could study it, I could read, I could visit. I could still have that, but it wouldn't necessarily be my job.
Right.
It had been my vocation because every time I did it, I felt joy.
Yeah.
Even sometimes to empty classrooms or to 2 or 3 people, when I would walk away, I would be like, oh, I learned something, or I really enjoyed just being with the language. But I had been ready to leave it behind. And I was like, all right, here I am. If you were to talk about anything you wanted for your last time out, what would you talk about? What would you discuss? And so for so many years, I taught about how to learn the language and how to use the language from a language acquisition perspective. And this one, my answer was inevitably, I talk about these cool teachings I learned from elders, like what is really in the words. That's what I would do. I've never had a chance to do that. Mm-hmm. That's what I would talk about. And I recall when I gave that talk, that was the last year I was ready to step away from teaching in the language. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to talk about the 7 generations and 7 grandfather teachings. These have, during that incredibly transformative time in my life, those were what gave me direction. And I thought, if I were to share anything, one last time out, I'd talk about these. I'd talk about what these words really meant. And I think I was the most surprised how well received it was. I was like, no way.
Really?
No way.
Yeah.
Talking about traditional values, talking about interconnection and responsibility. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the next day at Indian Ed, people were like, oh, they really liked your talk. I was like, really? Like etymology, linguistics, morphology, as well as the cultural and spiritual components of it. Yeah. So I had at that point decided, well, if I have another chance, another opportunity, I'll speak about this.
Yeah.
I'll talk about the 7 grandfather teachings and the 7 generations. It was something at that point where I'm like, even if I'm not talking about the language, if I reach a point in my life where I can't discuss, can't think about, can't meditate upon truth, love, honesty, humility, respect, courage, I'm doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, I saw a path forward. So that is where that talk began. Well,
my favorite part of I think was the love chapter, where you talk about it's more, how do you're talking about, you're describing love instead of, can you say a little bit more about that instead of it just being defined?
I'd love to. And that was an important distinction to make, was that I don't think the language is trying to define something eternal. Mm-hmm. He tries to describe how it relates, how it acts within us. So that word that I was discussing, Zakiituin, the grandfather teaching, the sacred law of love, it has in it to emerge. Zog is to emerge. So when we talk about Zagachwe, it is the sun coming from behind a mountain as it's rising in the morning. And when it rises, it's shining on everyone. He is shining on everyone and everything. We're seeing by example an unconditional love.
Yeah.
It's shining on everyone and anything. And for me, when I was trying to describe that, because earlier in the book, I say with truth, the grandfather teaching of truth, that I think the language is censoring itself. The spirit of the language is censoring itself when it says, I can't define something eternal to you. I can only speak to a certain extent. After that, it has to be experienced. So it's not really coming from a place of language, which is the sound of our thought. It's something emerging from deep within us. Mm-hmm. And then when it does come out, it's for the benefit of all of our relatives. And that was important for me because I think in nowadays, we try to define, codify what love is.
Right. Like we need to be right.
Yeah.
We need to
black and white.
Define what that is so we can fit within that parameters.
Absolutely. And you'll see a whole bunch of social media, even books, striving for that definition rather than seeing it as a lived experience.
Yes.
Something beyond words. Like we can't define it. We can't describe those feelings we have, maybe for grandma and grandpa, for our children, our nieces and nephews, maybe our grandchildren. There are no words for it. No poem, sculpture, painting, I think has really ever captured it. Yet I love how the language's approach is like it describes it.
Yeah.
It's something that it's not coming from our thoughts. It's emerging from deep within.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember you saying that I think a lot about is, that emerging and the budding of leaves and how it happens. And during one presentation, you said, have you ever tried to make yourself fall in love with someone? Like it just doesn't, you can't make yourself do that. And I think about that often because I think we've all been there like, oh, that person would be a really good partner or that person would take good care of me, but it's not there. Right. And I remember you just like that emergence is just something that happens that we can't control.
Yeah. And it's beyond our control. It's really, I think, beyond our total comprehension. So it has to be that lived experience. And I think, again, we have all had that experience. Like, I'm going to love that person no matter what. And it's never really genuine or authentic, is it? Rather than, again, those feelings we have for people we hold very dear to us.
I think about Ida a lot, and love is always what she leads with. And I remember when we were at MPS Indian Ed, she would always say, like, modern society has really skewed love, and they always want to make it like a sexual love or a romantic love. And she would always say, like, no, we can love people purely and with our whole heart without some other intent. And so that was, I still feel like that is her mission. When she got her Lifetime Achievement Award this year at the Minnesota Indian Education Association, she talked about how much she loved people and that we need to love one another to care for one another. And it's just something that I really think about, especially when in modern society, we're always trying to label it, define it, make it a certain way, skew it in some way.
Becomes transactional. If you do this for me, that shows me that you love me. And from her perspective, that traditional, like old school traditional Anishinaabe, Lakota as well, philosophy with life. And it's like leading with love, even to love one another. When we look at that word that I use in the book, Sakiituin, to be able to say that, it's Sakiitik. Like it's a natural translation and progression for that. Yeah. And she's been a living example of that. Not someone who maybe tells you to do this. You can watch her lead her life with that kind of love.
Well, I think the English language is very much like love is. So it's just one word where, like, I feel like native languages, indigenous languages really conceptualize it into something that means more, right? Love is such in English, it's like, oh, I love you. But when you say it, in Ojibwe, it's like the sun, like all these things come into play, and it just gives more of a meaning behind it. And it's just, I feel like when you express that, there's just instead of like when you say it in English, it's just LOVE, and so when you say it, and if it connects to you a little bit more, like the individual and then the people too. You talk about, you kind of brought up grandchildren, and so that's what relates to the 7 generations. You want to talk a little bit about what that means?
Well, that was, again, in that transformative period, there were one last thing to speak about. What would it be about? And the 7 generations came up immediately because I thought it was so cool. I think Ojibwe, Anishinaabe Mo in the Ojibwe language, handles it with elegance and sophistication. When we were working at Indian Ed as an Ojibwe teacher, I'd be asked repeatedly, how do you translate 7 generations in Ojibwe? And it's like too clumsy of a question. It's too awkward. It handles the idea of 7 generations with one relative term, Anakobichigan, or it would be Indanakobichigan, my great-grandchild, my great-grandparent. And when you think about it, if it means both of those, it can also mean my ancestors. So if you look that up in the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, Indanakobichigan or Anakobichigan, you'll see an ancestor, a great-grandparent, or great-grandchild. Yet, logically, if it means both my great-grandparent and great-grandchild, you're implying 7 generations. 7
Either
generations.
Way, up and down.
Past present, and future. That are punctuated by this concept of, I'm inextricably interconnected to you. I'm inextricably linked to you. When we were speaking about Sakiituin earlier, we looked at that one word part, that morpheme, Zog, which is to emerge. The morpheme I love in Anakobichigan, it's Anik. And it really means to be interconnected, to be interlinked, to work in a sequence. So if we translate that word, it means my great-grandparent, my ancestor, my great-grandchild. But if we spiritually and culturally interpret it, it means that being I'm inextricably interconnected to, that being I'm inextricably linked to.
Yeah.
And that link, that connection, that has the potential to affect me, but also my affections have the potential to affect you as well. So to leave people with that idea in a society and a day and age where I think we're encouraged to be self-centered.
Right.
I think we're encouraged just to think exclusively of ourselves, to, you know, not consider the past or have a lack or maybe even indifference for what will happen
just
in the
look
future.
out for yourself.
I'm looking out for me.
Yeah.
I'm looking out for number one. The moment people realize this, it's a transformative moment. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait, I have the potential to affect someone I may never see, speak to, listen to, or hold.
Exactly.
How do I want to treat them? And that's what I like to carry on with in the book and how to describe that.
I think that's really powerful too, because especially what I see with non-native teachers is they look at, you know, how do you, like, you want to get good grades because you want to go to college and you want to get a good job and you want to make money and things like that. Another one of our colleagues, Tammy Johnson, who was one of the first Native counselors in the state, you know, she really sort of put that thought on its head, right? Like, we don't want to individualize student learning. We want to look at this in a community. How do we work together collectively? You know, how will you going to college support your family and your community? How will it help strengthen Indigenous people overall? And so just a really beautiful way, even thinking about what you're saying, when that circle gets widened even more. How do we care for everyone as we move forward? So I think probably most people know you for your word of the day. And so essentially what you gave us now is like a little snapshot of what you do. You take a word apart, you dive into it, you really help explain these cultural pieces that are deeply embedded into the language. And can you talk a little bit about how the language teaches us how to be, as well, in this case, Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people?
Yes. Even on that note, as a human being, I think when we look at, I think the original meaning of that word nowadays, a more contemporary translation can be Indigenous person, Indian person, but I think its pre-contact meaning was human being. And for me, the language, something I found absolutely fascinating when I had a chance to work with and learn from elders, from fluent first language speakers, language and culture carriers, was what is actually in the word itself. And it takes me a while to realize that, this is a genius, an ingenious 13,000-year investment in us. I think that our ancestors put these meanings into the words themselves, rather than carving them into stone, rather than maybe painting them. If you look at the word, you can see someone's spiritual experience, lived experience that has been embedded in the meaning of a word. So one of my great teachers, I'll never forget this, when he said, my greatest teacher has been the language. When I've been able to go and look at what are in these words, I can hear someone's lived experience, maybe from 400 years ago, maybe 800 years ago, maybe even thousands of years ago, that we too went through this. And so for me, what I try to share when I share some of these words were, I think, brilliant psychological, philosophical, ethical insights into leading a good life, a life of peace and balance, that someone who I never had an opportunity to meet, see, speak to, or even just visit with, wanted to share with me.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
And the genius part of the investment is, how will we pass this down? You know, even someone 7 generations ago, it's hard to remember that person's name, even how they're related to you. But we all can speak. We all use the language. We do that. We've scientifically proven this for the same reason that we can touch, hear, taste, smell, or see. It's hardwired in us. They're an ingenious place to put these teachings. isn't something we do on a daily basis. We speak to one another. We use the language.
Right.
And I think that that's really brilliant to have had an opportunity to share that with people in a day and age where people who don't know that may be quick to dismiss language revitalization, cultural revitalization. Why is this even important? You already have a language, if it's English, French, or Spanish, that you can use. To share that, there's so much more that at a cursory glance you may not get. However, if you have an opportunity to listen to someone, to listen to a storyteller, to an elder, a fluent first language speaker, you may get some invaluable insights in your own life.
Yeah.
That's been passed down. So
is that part of your Ojibwe dictionary project, or how does that work?
The dictionary project was, I can't even remember how many winters ago it was. It was maybe 20.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or 18. But at that point, that's where I began getting some of these insights.
You're a linguist at heart.
I was at the time. So I was recording elders, and I was also editing the sound files that if you go to the Ojibwe People's Dictionary and you click the play button, a lot of Eugene Stillday's work was, I had listened to his voice for hundreds of hours.
Oh my goodness.
And unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet him. I know he passed away during the pandemic, which is sad. But while I was doing that and while I was recording some other elders, they would share a word with me. And, at this time, you're writing a dictionary and there are tons and tons of citations to record. But I would speak to them, and with one word, it could turn into maybe a 15 to 20-minute talk.
Oh, my goodness.
On this is what this word means. These are the word parts of it. These are the contexts we would use it in. I remember I was at this ceremony done by this person, and he used this word in this context. And I was floored. I'm like, that's a lot of knowledge embedded in one word. All of a sudden, people with a strong oral tradition, maybe not as strong of a literary tradition or a written tradition, people wonder, well, how have you retained so much knowledge? And there I saw it firsthand. And at a moment's notice, people were able to use this repository of cultural and spiritual knowledge. And I was floored by it. I was like, I need to look more in depth. And maybe if I try really hard, if I put a little effort into it, I will be able to do a fraction of what some of these elders had shared with me.
Yeah. Well, you're doing an amazing job.
I'm just thinking about like humility, right? Like listening to you, and, when people are like, oh, I'm an elder, right? Like the true people never say, oh, I'm an elder.
Yeah.
Because our elders have elders. Like I think of Ida, who has an elder.
Oh, totally.
Right. And, you never stop learning, and just your humility and how it's so incongruent with how modern society works. And I joke, all the time when people are like, oh, you're an expert on this. And I was like, you can always tell people like hate that word expert because you're always needing to learn.
There's that cultural divide too, because in one society, they want you to be the expert, and that is who they're looking for. Whereas in the other one, it is almost a faux pas, and to roll into a native circle or community meeting like, oh yeah, I'm the best at this, or I'm expert. Whereas that humility, it's such an important grandfather teaching, sacred law. It's so important to cultivate that. And in fact, this book, it takes so long for me to work on the grandfather teachings. Because for years, I said, who on earth would want to listen to me if you could listen to the people who taught me? Like, I can't even come close to delivering something that they've shared with me. So maybe you should go talk to them and do yourself a favor.
Well, and I think people think, oh, that's imposter syndrome. But it's not. Like, it's just when you have the ability to hear from people who who were so impactful on your learning, you just, like, it just seems incongruent that you could be that same person.
Oh,
You'll
totally.
find to it. So you talk about language, the potential, like these words are many, many, many years old. The experiences are many, many years old. But I know that you're also engaged with creating new words. How do you continue to make the language contemporary? Can you share? I know you've had some really fun words. What was it? Iridescent, I think you worked on. There are some other words that people are asking. How do we use that in the language when they don't currently exist?
Absolutely. And this was one I heard from the late Mukwe-Widamukwe-Bun, the late Jessie Clark, who worked at Anishinaabe Academy. She was the elder there. And I've heard it repeated in the community so often, was that anything we will ever need to know or use is already in the language. It will be our responsibility putting it together in a way that is understandable from communities, but it's already there. I've heard of a number of cases of people working with physics who became enamored with the language because it was very adept in describing some of these difficult concepts in ways that Latin or English had problems with, had run into some pitfalls and stumbled with. So I was fascinated by that. I've had a chance to work on translations. I rarely do them. Again, this is, I know for a fact, I don't have the same judgments that a first language speaker has. So as someone who had worked with translations, it was always important for me to be responsible and go and ask the right people. Now, it's also self-centered too. When they come up with the description of it, there's this satisfying moment where it's like, yes, I get that. I understand that. And I realize, I would not have said it that way. So that's a fun one. One I love. Makade Mashkiki Wabo. I'm drinking some right now, and it is so funny. It is black medicine liquid. It's coffee. So you'll have some communities who will shorten and just say copy, which is a borrowing from English into Ojibwe, which doesn't have that F sound. So they'll use the P, copy. And then someone else seeing it describes it as makade, black, mushkiki, medicine, that bitter flavor, wabu, which is a liquid. So it's black medicine liquid. Coffee.
It's certainly my medicine in the
Indeed. I can't imagine someone trying that for the first time and thinking, that's got a unique flavor.
Yeah.
Almost medicinal. You start your morning every day like this, huh?
Yeah. I've tried many times to give it up and I just can't. I have made it healthier over the years, but it's something that I can't go without.
And there's an insight there too. It's a medicine. I should treat it accordingly as an insomniac. And there's a particular time and a way to use this.
Yeah. It's first thing in the morning.
Totally.
So we did have a question on with the 7 generations and the 7 grandfather teachings. How would you see teachers using this book in the classroom?
This is unique for me. I remember when I worked with Indian Ed, I would try to share the language with teachers rather than having me go into the classroom.
Right,
because, of course, along with being chronically underemployed, there was at that time an incredible shortage of Ojibwe teachers who were able to get into the classroom.
I think it's fair to say that there probably still is.
Probably still is. I hope it's getting better, but my approach became handing this off to the teachers and letting them determine how will I talk about this with a 4th grade class or a 2nd grade class or a kindergarten class. So what I wanted to do was provide genuine and authentic material that someone who, if you've ever worked I remember I taught immersion with High Five. And I had worked with kindergarten classes, and these are special people. They're insightful. They're able to innovate at a moment's notice. And I'm like, I don't think I can do what you can do. I'm going to let you quarterback this. And how would you?
Yeah.
describe this grandfather teaching of humility or respect in a classroom setting. And they're so clever.
Yeah.
When they do it. So,
well, and then you can, I mean, every year is different with a different group of students, and you can tailor it to the students that are in there. And I mean, you can use this all the way up through high school or college, I think. And
I agree.
And one, I do like the bigger font, so thank you. And I wouldn't say I don't want to say it's an easy read, but it is. It's less than 100 pages, right? So it is something that I think is digestible for teachers, and then you can pick and choose like what you want in your classroom and what would go along with your current lessons and so forth. So, but yeah, I really appreciate the larger font and but you can get it's so philosophical in some of these where you can dig really. It may be less than 100 pages, but it can get really, really deep, really fast.
Thank you, and that was by design. In fact,
awesome.
It was difficult for me as a former member of the academy who had worked as taught as a professor to actually simplify this.
Right.
And like, no, you're being a little too wordy here, Professor Vukelich. Why don't we try to make it a little more simple and conversational?
Yeah.
Some of my favorite books that I've read about Indigenous culture almost come across as a conversation where it is almost, although it's in a book, you can almost hear that elder speaking with you. And I'm like, okay, if maybe I can come close to that, I'll have succeeded in my aim.
Oh, and, yeah, you did. I love the size of it. It fit in my purse. You can just take it with you. Yeah, it was, and it's a beautiful cover.
I think the problem is, again, we're going to circle back to that expert, right? Like when you publish something, it becomes a print and it becomes what you are known for. So I can't even imagine sort of like the mental, spiritual, physical, emotional gymnastics you must have done writing this book because you felt like you had to get it right and the obligation to get it right. And I think when we use the word obligation, a lot of people are like, oh, it's to other people, but the obligation you have to the community, your ancestors, to the spirits. You want to talk a little bit about the struggles to get it right?
I'd be delighted. It's kind of a funny story. When I was at MIEA, it was my first time doing this presentation at the Minnesota Indian Education Association. And I had done it a few times already. I had done it with our professional development with the Minneapolis Public Schools. And I thought, okay, I'll do it here. And it felt good at that time. I had done my, what I think is my diligence and my research that any of these words, if you were to look up in the dictionary with the morphology, that's all sound. And I recall it my first time at MIEA, Ogimakwe Benjamin from Mille Lacs, Mississauga First Nation or reservation was there. And she had heard it, and I was actually very intimidated because here is the leader of a sovereign nation and a sovereign Ojibwe nation who has a vast knowledge of cultural Ojibwe culture and spirituality. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to get up and do the talk. And she came up and greeted me and asked me in email a couple of months later, we're having an elders luncheon at Mystic Lake, and I think you would be a delight to go and speak to these elders. Yeah. Would you be interested in that? I'm like, of course I would. And so I thought this is going to be a small luncheon, maybe 25, 30 people. And when I walked into the ballroom at Mystic Lake, a ballroom filled with hundreds of elders from a number of different nations. Mm-hmm. And I'm about to speak about the 7 generations and 7 grandfathers. To these people, this was intimidating at first. And then I thought, well, you've shared this with other elders. It's a bigger number. And I recall afterwards, I had been approached by so many of them. In fact, 2 of the fluent first language speakers who were major contributors to the Ojibwe People's Dictionary came up and said, "You spoke so well. You did so good with that. You really should continue speaking about this." And I thought, okay, now I feel like I have, that was the moment where I felt, all right, this wasn't panned or even criticized by the elders in our community or even internationally at this point. There were a number of different Indigenous nations there. And I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead with that. I feel good with that. But I only spoke about it for years. For years. It would take years for me to actually finish the book. Finish isn't even fair. I didn't want to write the book. I didn't. I had no intention at all. After graduate school, writing became a chore. It became labor.
Oh, sure.
And I thought, well, this is very dear to me. I don't want this to feel stale or like a chore or labor. And it would take until my father in 2020 had pancreatic cancer, stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And at the end of things, he made me promise that I would write the book. The book I'd been speaking about for several years.
And the dedication to him in here as well. It was indeed, because he was the reason. And he made me promise as he was getting ready to go home, as they say in the language. And at that point, I knew I had to. And that's when I began. I transcribed one of the talks and started from there. And it began to effortlessly flow. It really did. The cover art, the art inside, the editor, it all came together. So that was...
Somehow our parents always know.
He knew. He knew. And I was just dragging my feet. And he knew if I didn't promise him that I may have not finished it by now. So
thanks, Dad.
Seriously. Thank you.
No, we really appreciate this. I think this is beautiful work, and really glad that your father said those things and got you rolling.
I am too.
You're off to a really, I mean, you are rolling. You have another book coming out, Wisdom Weavers, Explore the Ojibwe Language and the Meaning of Dreamcatchers, coming up. And September 3rd, it comes out. Tell us a little bit about this book, this new one.
Well, this one began, it was January, and someone who had watched my Instagram, the reels and the words of the day that I do, reached out to me.
Yeah.
And we had a Zoom meeting about the potential of writing a book, a kid's book.
Oh, okay.
And at the time, I was intrigued. I want to be shameless. I needed the work at the time and some and so I'm like, okay, I'll do it. I wasn't excited to work at it in the beginning. When I worked as an immersion teacher,
I'm seeing a pattern here.
I know, so
I just want to, okay.
And, I had translated a number of children's book when I worked as an immersion teacher, because when you're working with little kids, they need books to read.
Still do, just saying.
Absolutely.
Still do.
So after like 2.5 years of translating children's books, I was like, well, I've had my share. I still love reading them with my son, but writing them and working on them wasn't as exciting. And so I thought, well, I'll give this a try. This will be fun. They wanted to be very language forward about it, which was probably the selling point for me. Anytime I have an opportunity to share the language with people, that's very inspiring for me. So that's where it began. And and it had some transformations along the way, but it worked out.
I love a few things about the book. One is that you have a native illustrator, and that doesn't happen as it should happen 100% of the time. But a lot with the American Indian Youth Literature Awards, that's one of the requirements, and we get a lot of books that are native authored, but then not native illustrated, which is just come on, folks. But so it's great that you have that here. And then the on the back of the book, you want to tell us a little bit about that. Is it called QR codes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You want to share a little bit about that?
Well, again, with the selling points, I think the first version was going to have buttons in it that you could press and hear someone speak. But as the technology changes ever so rapidly, they're like, no, I think we can be very, very language forward with using QR codes. And I thought, well, that's great. I've used them at museums, at historical societies where you do it and you can hear someone's voice, which I love.
Yes.
Some of the words in Anishinaabemowin, I will admit, are long and can be very intimidating to punctuate.
Everybody makes fun of what blueberry pie is it?
Of course. And the first time you see mini bashki minasigini batuyan guesa chikani bakwe shigan, it is like, that's 32 letters. Too long for me. I'm gonna have to work on that one. So to be able to share it with people with just simply using their phone and hopefully sitting with their child, maybe in bed before bedtime.
Yes.
And listening to the words before you go to sleep, it I think will help parents share the language. Yeah. And then kids they're older. So they effortlessly use technology nowadays. So
yes, definitely.
I was noting that they got your hair perfectly, which I appreciated. But you do not wear a single suit in this entire book. And I was like, this is not accurate. They got the hair right. So, they didn't get the suit.
What they have the house uniform, which is a t-shirt and jeans when I'm in public.
There you go.
And I will do this when I get up in the morning. So when I drop Jack off, I have the coat on. And this is so cool.
Do you have a dog? Yeah.
We do have a dog.
It looks very boxer-like.
Edda is a boxer.
We love boxers.
Edda is a flashy boxer. But usually this is my wife. My wife will take Edda to school. But this is dropping Jack off every morning where it's like, Gigawabman, Gishawaynaman. And now, when it came to writing the book, that was one of the things was I could kind of document this time in our lives. To be able to look back. And this is something I say to him every day when I drop him off at school. Gigawabman, Gishawaynaman. What you don't see in the book is that Jack's admonishing me saying, Dad, you have to say this before I get out of the car. If I open up the door, they're going to hear you.
Yeah, so that's okay. Totally kid-like. Yep.
I'm all right.
I don't think that goes away much ever.
I doubt if it will, but until maybe he's an adult.
Yeah.
So I do want to bring us back very quickly to a publication and talk about Classroom real quick. Sadly, this publication that we published through the Shakopee, Metawakan, and Sioux Communities Understand Native Minnesota narrative campaign doesn't have Wisdom Weavers in it because it's so brand new.
It is.
It does contain this one.
Which I'm so grateful for. Miigwech.
You are so welcome. It's a delightful book. But I do want our listeners to know that the book and reference to the book is right in here on page 3, because I talk about the values in here and some of the values. And what I recommend to teachers is as you get to know these values, either Dakota or Anishinaabe values, you can take other books that aren't written by Anishinaabe or Dakota people and then make them usable, better used in classrooms by talking about, well, what are the values that we can align these with? And so that sort of frees us up. So as teachers read this book, or, Wisdom Weavers, they'll be able to pick out those same values. How do we apply those values into our classroom? And then one last thing, when we all worked together at Anishinaabe, we jokingly called them decoder rings, because we have the ways of knowing on the outside, we have the values in the middle, but then we have does it sound like, feel like, look like? Because oftentimes we say, you need to respect, you need to show respect. And kids are like,
well, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
Right? What does love mean? Right? Like, is that the love I see on TV? What does it mean to be honest? And I might actually have you talk about truth and honesty, because I think that's a tough one for people to see. But this little decoder ring, and if people are interested in seeing more of this or knowing more about how we use that in a classroom, I'm happy to do that. But before we go, could you tell us a little bit about truth and honesty?
Ooh.
I'd love to.
Tough.
In a personal note, seeing that, it brought back what a beautiful memory of working with Ida Downwind. If we were on a Google chat, there was this, she was already junior elder, I think that was the term. We were chatting on Gmail back and forth, going over these words and how they're spelt in Ojibwe and how they were appropriate. And because she was, again, she led her life that way. She leads her life that way. And why wouldn't that be in the classroom if this is how you should lead your life? And so, yeah, when we had a chance to speak about mino-bimaadiziwin, righteousness, honesty, and mino-bimaadiziwin, truth, these were important things because when you hear them in English, they're kind of synonymous, aren't they? In standard North American English, if you tell the truth, you're honest. You're honest, you tell the truth. And here we were like, how will we describe this to students, to educators, to our community? And mino-bimaadiziwin, truth, has for it a couple of etymologies. For me, all of the etymologies are true. It's quantum, it's not binary. It's not a true or false, 1 or 0, black or white. There are a number of teachings embedded in this one word. Often I think, as educators, is it true or false? Is it plus or negative? Is it 1 or 0? And one of the first etymologies I heard came from the late Marlene Stately, where for her it had an ide, which was the heart way to speak. Mm-hmm. I'm speaking to you from the center, the core of my being. In fact, one of those petroglyphs in there, you can see a line coming through the heart. And we were like, this is exactly what we're speaking about. When you see a relative, an ancestor, how would I describe that? It would have to come from the very center and core of my being. Another one with truth was that mino-bimaadiziwin that we spoke about earlier. Dabe, to a certain extent that you really can't surpass, that you can't go beyond in way to speak. I can tell you the truth. I will not omit from it. I'll not add on to it. I will speak as far as I can with it. I will speak my truth to you. And that's where I imply that the language may be censoring itself, saying, I can't define something eternal to you. You may be using the wrong tool. If you're using a word, which is the sound of our thought to describe this, because the language is very sophisticated. It's very complex. It has laser-like precision, but we can sometimes mistake our words and thoughts for things, which they are not. I can say the word nibi, water, but we know that this is the water. It is not the word. And then we see honesty. What does that mean? When we looked at it through the lens of the language, it has guayak, which is right, proper, straight, correct, in alignment, in otsi, which is to live. It's not to speak. Yeah, it's to live. Invariably, it is, are my words in alignment with my actions? That properness, that correctness, that alignment. Am I walking the walk or am I just talking the talk?
Oh, it's such a, it's hard. Yeah. It's really hard to live a life. It's easy to say words sometimes. And then, inside it's,
we all have that experience where someone says, oh, you should act this way. You should dress this way. You should speak this way. And you see them do something completely different on a Friday or Saturday night out on the town. And it's contradiction. Right. So for me, in one way, honesty, mino-bimaadiziwin, it's being authentic. Mm-hmm. Are my words in alignment with my actions? Right. And in a more spiritual way, it's a holistic life, a holy life, if you will, where I do what I say and I say what I do. Yeah. And so as educators, and especially with someone like Ida, that's important. That's first and foremost, that I want you not just to get educated, not just to learn, not just to go to college, but to lead your life in a good way, in a way that brings peace to yourself, but also to your community. Mm-hmm.
Well, sadly, I think that we need to come to a close, even though I wish that we could talk about this forever and ever because there's so much to learn from you. But I think that on this note, as we talk about truth and honesty, it's really great for teachers to think about, am I doing the things that I need to do? Am I upholding? Am I living in an authentic way? And so sort of ending on a note that I really want to put it back on teachers to think, am I representing the type of person that I need to be in the classroom? And is that being true and honest to myself? So this book is already out. It can be found on Amazon, can be found at Birch Bark. And then, of course, this lovely brand new one, September 3rd.
Yes.
And will there be more books? Or is there more things coming?
I'm just beginning a brand new project. I just started it with the solstice to be auspicious. For years, I did an Ojibwe word of the day.
Yes.
A live program on Thursday nights, and I've begun transcribing those and editing those into a volume so that you'd be able to listen to them as well as be able to read them. So I'm going to start doing those online as well.
Well, I mean, for audiobooks, are you doing like an audio? I would love to hear, your voice for the 7 grandfathers.
I have recorded the audiobook for the grandfather teachings, great. And it is now live on Audible.
Oh, is it?
It is. Audible, awesome. Google Play, and
my kids will be will listen in the car now.
Or Spotify.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we got an Apple, I think it's iTunes rather than iBooks, but check it out.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely.
And I pronounce all the words in there. So if you see some of the Ojibwe words, you can hear me.
Hear me pronounce them for you. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. And we wish you all the luck and can't wait to see that additional book come out. You are on a roll. I'm
getting the hang of it, I hope.
Doing great things.
Well deserved, because you've been doing this for so long, and it's exciting to see your spirit aligning with your passions. So
I'm very grateful for it. I'm very grateful to be here. Miigwech Bizendawik. Thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Books Are Good Medicine. Subscribe to our channel on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also visit our website, booksaregoodmedicine.com, to find episodes and resources, or to send us a comment. This podcast is sponsored by the Shakopee, Madawakan Sioux community and produced by Goff Public. Our theme song is Stomp Dance by Blue Dog. The opinions expressed on the Books Are Good Medicine podcast by its co-hosts and guests are their own in their personal capacities and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization with whom they are affiliated or with the podcast sponsor.